This is Right to Life Radio. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Well, Jonathan,
howdy.
It's been quite the week for the pro-life movement as we've been rocked with some major statements by President Trump regarding his stance as the Republican nominee for president regarding the abortion issue. We want to dig into that. We want to dig into some very important and hopeful developments, question mark in parentheses.
I'm Ron Burgundy.
I am Ron Burgundy. With regards to SB 1196, the really terrible euthanasia-assisted suicide bill that we've been covering here on Right to Life Radio for the last couple of weeks. So I think we're going to get started, though, talking about President Trump, because I was asked to come on Trevor Carey's show earlier in the week to talk about it. I discussed it on my show, John Girardi Show, earlier in the week, and we haven't heard from Jonathan yet on this whole thing, although Jonathan and I think just by virtue of hanging out for as long as we have together and talking about these things together as often as we do, we are often kind of a mind meld, and our thoughts on this stuff are usually pretty much completely simpatico.
I think that's generally true.
So I want to be fair. I think my initial instinct was to throw my hands in the air and, throw my laptop through the window or something when I first heard President Trump's comments. I'm still not thrilled, but there might be some bits of realism that are tempering my negative thoughts, but there's also some real, I think, bad repercussions to what President Trump said. All right, so for those of you who weren't paying attention, President Trump released a kind of video statement,
which he's been teasing for a while.
Yeah, a video statement that was accompanied by a couple of posts on the topic from his Truth Social account. And it's basically, he's trying to lay out, this is my position on abortion. And a bunch of people in the pro-life movement were urging him, look, Roe v. Wade is overturned. We need to have our federal elected officials pushing for some kind of restriction of abortion at the federal level. Jonathan, you and I on this show, we've been, pretty vocal in our belief that I don't want our federal elected representatives to be running from the issue of abortion as soon as we have the opportunity to actually pass laws to limit it. I think that would be disastrous. And unfortunately, ever since Dobbs was overturned, all of the state level referenda, like ballot initiatives that have dealt with the abortion issue, have gone the wrong way. They've all gone the wrong way for the pro-life movement, even in otherwise red states like Ohio and Kentucky. Ohio was able to pass through its legislature a great law limiting abortion to only the first 6 weeks of pregnancy. That law got overturned by a state ballot initiative that basically, through a sizable majority of Ohio voters, put basically legal abortion throughout pregnancy into the Ohio Constitution. Kentucky rejected a state ballot initiative to limit abortion. Several other states, California obviously enshrined legal abortion into its state constitution through Proposition 1. That was no surprise. But it's gone badly in almost every single state where this question's been decided.
And sometimes fairly horrifically badly. It's not like, I'll give an example.
Ohio is, I think,
that's the
number
worst,
one. The worst possible example was Ohio.
But to put it in perspective for everybody, so people understand, just a comparison, because a lot of times if you're from California, you may think, okay, well, what was the election, California 2022 gubernatorial election? Mm-hmm. That was the last time. It was interesting that Ohio and California both had gubernatorial elections in 2022. Well, in California, our friendly neighborhood Gavin Newsom won by 59% to 41%, essentially.
Okay. So more or less 60-40.
Right. And in that same election, the abortion referendum won essentially 66-33.
Right. So legal abortion for all 40 weeks of pregnancy and for any reason is more popular in California even than Gavin Newsom, who won by almost 20 points.
Right. So, John,
that's depressing and distressing.
It's not great, but let's assume, okay, so it's just let's say roughly speaking, let's say it's 7 percentage points more popular than the Democratic president or politician in California. Mm-hmm. You could kind of understand that. You could say, okay, well, California is a really pro-abortion state. That makes sense.
Probably a lot of Republicans are pro-choice in California. Yeah.
It's even more popular. Okay, that's fine. So let's assume that there's about a 7% delta that it's more popular than the Democrat. Okay, so let's look at Ohio. In Ohio, you had, again, same time, November 8th, 2022, you had a Republican and a Democrat running against each other. The Democratic woman, Nan Whaley, was pretty stinking pro-choice, pro-abortion. Right. She was running against an old white guy named Mike DeWine, who was a former U.S. senator and
very pro-life.
Very pro-life. But, I mean, literally, Mike DeWine is, just to put it in perspective, he's a grandpa. I don't say this in any way to be rude, but he is 77 years old. He is basically
he's almost old enough to run for president. Yeah.
He's a little younger than Joe Biden, about the same age as Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But it's not like he is this
dynamic, charismatic leader.
Yeah. Not like a Pete Buttigieg or someone.
He gets elected governor by a substantial margin.
And John, how substantial? 62 to 37%.
Okay. So
it was a 25-point win.
He cruises to victory as a pro-life Republican governor, but then the next year
he did significantly better in Ohio than Newsom did in California. Right. Like by a good bit. A massive difference. It was like essentially like a 40-point swing between the two of them. And yet, last year in 2023, when the same type of amendment that California had, California's amendment won 66 to 33. The Ohio amendment won 59 to 41.
So let's think about that again, folks. In Ohio, a Republican governor wins 62 to 38, but legal abortion also wins in Ohio more or less 60 to 40.
Right.
And I think President Trump is seeing all of that, and he is terrified that he will lose the election on that basis if there are other key battleground states that are going to have abortion referenda, or if the whole national election becomes a referendum on abortion,
which is exactly what Biden and the Democrats want.
Right. So if you look at the polling data, Trump is beating Biden on individual issues pretty much across the board. Foreign policy, he's doing better than Biden. Economy, he's doing better than Biden. This, that, the other. Almost every issue, immigration, Trump is doing much better than Biden is.
Right.
And that's the stuff that Trump wants to run on. Trump clearly does not want to talk about abortion because abortion is the one issue where Biden polls better than Trump does.
It's literally the only, not the economy,
nothing
not
else.
The border.
That's all.
Not national security.
That's all Biden really has to run on. So Trump clearly wants to stay as far away from the abortion issue as possible. I can understand that. I can understand not wanting it to be the signature headline thing. But what I can't stand idly by and just say, oh, it's fine, is when Donald Trump comes out and gives a statement like he did Monday. So in the statement he gave Monday, he basically said, in reference to these various states that are having in 2024 referenda on abortion. So Florida is having a popular vote on whether or not to insert a right to abortion in their state constitution. Arizona, a battleground state, is having a statewide ballot initiative to decide, are they going to enshrine legal abortion in their state constitution? Trump needs to win those two states.
Yep.
Trump didn't say, I'm supportive of efforts to preserve the right to life. I don't support these two ballot initiatives because of reasonable reasons. No, he is afraid that Republicans will vote both for legal abortion and against him.
Right.
So he said, he didn't basically say this, in his statement on the topic of abortion this past Monday, he repeatedly said, for Republican voters, follow your conscience.
Follow your heart.
Follow your heart.
Literally the Disney Channel abortion position.
He kept saying that people, do what's right for your family. My family is not what's impacted by a state's abortion laws. Who's impacted are the innocent people who are being killed.
Right.
He kept saying, follow your heart to individual voters.
Right.
It's one thing to say, hey, I encourage Republican voters to vote in favor of life. I recognize not every Republican voter agrees with me. I would ask for your vote regardless. He could say something like that, but that's not what he said.
Right.
He has essentially said, one, I am not pursuing any federal legislative standard when it comes to abortion. Roe v. Wade was overturned. The issue is for the states now, and it's a state decision. He almost talked, Jonathan, I think you and I were discussing this, or maybe I was just talking to myself. Maybe I was talking to myself and thought I talked to you. This is happening more and more. He almost had the attitude of someone who's like a sideline spectator to the issue of legal abortion in America,
Which he
as
has-
opposed to someone who is running for president.
Right.
And he's basically, the Supreme Court overturned it, and that's what everyone wanted. Nobody liked Roe v. Wade, which I thought was silly. There were plenty of liberals.
No.
Plenty of liberals were quite content with Roe v. Wade.
No, it's not
Thank you
just
very
that,
much.
John. He said literally it's now been repealed as everyone demanded.
And nobody
on
demanded
both
it.
sides.
Nobody demanded
All
it on
the
the
legal
left.
scholars on both sides
No.
demanded that Roe v.
No.
Wade. Now, John, I should say, to be fair to President Trump,
There were liberal legal scholars who thought that Roe v. Wade was not very well reasoned.
yeah, even Justice Ginsburg.
Yes.
So
Nonetheless,
if you want
they
to
were
throw him
not,
a little,
yeah. Nonetheless, none of them were happy that Dobbs was issued.
Right.
Okay. So Trump is almost making this argument that abortion just belongs with the states, and I'm not going to pursue any federal limits on abortion. Almost. He's just acting as I wash my hands of the issue. I step back and I'm going to let them deal with it.
Since we're in the Easter season, there's another person that
Yes,
tried to
I
kind
was
of
immediately thinking of Pontius Pilate.
wash
in that
his
example.
hands of the whole.
Now, I will say this somewhat in Trump's defense.
Yes.
When it comes to trying to pass federal legislation to limit abortion, in fairness to Trump, the odds of, even if he had a Republican majority in the House, a Republican majority in the Senate, and he was in the White House, the odds of him being able to pass such legislation are slim to none.
Totally legitimate.
Because of the filibuster rule in the Senate.
Yes.
Effectively in the Senate, to pass most things that aren't directly attached to the budget, you need 60 votes to advance legislation, not just a simple majority. And Trump, I think, could reasonably maybe have the thought, why am I going to expend a bunch of political capital staking out a position that I'm never going to be able to successfully accomplish? Okay, fair. I think the problem is, though, he does need to get voters who are pro-life, right? I mean,
Right.
He cannot win without pro-life voters also. He has said nothing that he will do to help us. He has sort of taken this posture of, well, mission accomplished. It's all done.
Right.
Roe v. Wade's overturned. Therefore, I'm done. I'm not pursuing any federal legislation. And all of you in the states, whatever you want to do, just follow your heart. But in the meantime, it's not just follow your heart. He's on the record blasting Florida for its abortion limitation
Right.
that was passed under Ron DeSantis. So it's not just that he's sort of abandoned pro-lifers in the individual states and kind of hung them out to dry. He's done things that have been actively harmful to them. Like
Right.
the sequence of events in Ohio last year. Let's remember this. November of 2023, Ohio is going to have this statewide vote on whether or not to put legal abortion into their state constitution and thereby repeal their state law, which was banning abortion at fetal heartbeat. In the run-up to that, in like September of 2023, Trump is blasting Ron DeSantis for signing in Florida
Horrible.
a law that did that precise thing. Of course, that took all the wind out of the pro-lifers' sails in Ohio. You had the likely presidential nominee saying that their state law that was limiting abortion only to the first 6 weeks of pregnancy was, quote, terrible.
Right.
So it's not just a question that if it were purely a thing of Trump saying, I'm just leaving this to the states, all right, I don't know that I'd agree with it, but it's not just that he's leaving it to the states. He's also, by his actions, actively undermining pro-lifers in the various states who are trying to fight against the advancement of legal abortion and who are trying to do the very thing that Roe v. Wade allowed us to do, which is restrict abortion.
Right.
So at the state level. So when we return, we're going to talk about the idea of, well, we need to stop talking about this. We need to sort of limit ourselves on the abortion issue because we need to win. And also this bizarre pledge of allegiance to IVF that is driving me and Jonathan crazy. All right, that's next on Right to Life Radio. We're back with Right to Life Radio. We're discussing President Trump's statement on his position on abortion as he is now the likely Republican nominee for the presidency. And Jonathan and I are more than a bit frustrated with the whole thing and the difficulties that it is posing for those of us in the pro-life movement who want to try to actively restrict abortion. And there's a couple of things about it that I think are harmful. Jonathan, you had a thought you were mentioning out of the break that you wanted to get started with before I get to the bizarre pledge of allegiance to IVF, which is also quite frustrating.
Oh, yes.
Hello. Yes. I'm talking to you.
Yes,
this radio show.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I thought there was one more thing on there.
No. Get to
I was
your
waiting
thing.
to start reading.
Get to your thing. Yeah.
All right. So here's what it is. The next
Live radio. Folks.
That's right.
All right.
The next part of it that I was going to say, Trump, in his defense, there's a couple points of this. If you pull them out individually, and it's true that this was wordsmithed, obviously. He had lots of people that worked on it with him. There's a couple points of it.
Did he, though?
I think, yeah, because he was reading this from a teleprompter. Because you can tell several times, like...
Really?
If you've watched enough Trump speeches, there's times where
it just seems like, though, there were so many things that he just kept repeating the same thing.
So
that made me think that he sort of ad-libbed it.
So there were definitely parts of it that were ad-libbed. Like the some of the radical stuff was where he was talking about, abortion, Democrats being the radical on this.
Yeah.
But
which that stuff was good. By
it
the
was
way.
good.
But anyway.
But so here's the line, John, that if I'm trying to give him the best opportunity to say this is
the best reading of what he said.
The best reading of what he's saying. There's like two things that I thought were very good. Number one is, he says, the 50-year-old battle over Roe v. Wade took it out of federal hands and brought it into the hearts, minds, and vote of the people in each state. It really was something. Now it's up to the states to do the right thing. Now, if you take that in a vacuum, you can argue and say, well, look, and I've seen some people try to argue this already. He was just espousing a strong 10th Amendment position. This is clearly what the pro-life movement has been fighting for years. We need to make this a states' rights issue. We don't want to have a federal top-down mandate that abortion has to be legal in all 50 states. Yeah. I will say it's true. Ideally, if he had led with that and said, states must protect it. You need to have a battle to win hearts and minds at the state level. But that's not what he said.
Well, and it's also a problem. He never defines with what, quote, do the right thing is.
Correct.
Yeah.
This is where it's very, at the end of the day, quote, at the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. You must follow your heart, or in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family and do what's right for yourself. Do what's for your children. Do what's right for your country and vote. So important to vote. So,
which is utter moral relativist word salad.
Yes.
It's not important to vote if you vote for the wrong thing. I mean, like, I don't think there's some grand virtue in voting on horrible policy. Is it really important that people vote if they're not voting for Donald Trump, for instance? I would be curious to hear his answer to that conundrum.
Yes.
It's not great. I mean, just even the way he was talking about it just sounded so bizarre. Like his unwillingness to say, I think my hope is that legislatures will enact solid protections for the unborn.
Yes.
Even though I recognize there's a lot of disagreement on this issue, and hopefully we can come to reasonable. Like, I don't even know what. Well, I just feel like there were 20 ways to say that better.
Yes. And here's the other thing.
And that he has left it in this. I just feel like he's left all these state level pro-lifers in this terrible position.
Well, and it's also, John, it's this weird position where on the one hand, he wants to say, no, it's up to the states. I wash my hands of it. I want to be. I don't want to talk about this anymore. While at the same time, he has to kind of still, because he was the president that appointed the justices that made this possible.
And by the way, just in case anyone thinks this show is just nothing but blasting Trump.
No.
We have been, over the course of the last 5 years, I think scrupulously fair.
Within our 501c3
compliant guidelines.
Right.
To acknowledge that Donald Trump did some unbelievably extraordinary stuff when it comes to the life issue.
Right.
He appointed 3 Supreme Court justices who got Roe v. Wade overturned. Better than George W. Bush on that score, better than George H.W. Bush on that score, better than Ronald Reagan on that score. The accomplishment of getting Roe overturned belongs to him and Mitch McConnell, and no one can take that away from either of them. That's secure for the rest of history. But the thing is, we got to call balls and strikes. I'm not going to say this was some fantastic statement.
Well, and this is where it gets tricky. He says in the middle of the statement, in the middle of all the, at the end of the day, it's about the will of the people, blah, blah, blah. He says, I wanted to thank the 6 justices, Chief Justice John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Neil Gorsuch, incredible people, for having the courage to allow this long-term, hard-fought battle to finally end. So that's it, John. It's over. The battle is over.
Yeah, and that's what's obnoxious to, you were talking about the 10th Amendment stuff.
Right.
I will be frank with our radio audience. I did not decide to be a pro-life activist for the sake of vindicating the cause of the proper interpretation of the 10th Amendment.
That was not like the ulterior motive behind.
Nobody is in the pro-life. No one is fighting for the cause of life. No one is fighting for the outlawing of abortion in order to secure sound constitutional law theory for the proper federalist balance between federal and state responsibilities. We are in this to stop the legal killing of children. As a legal theory matter, I guess I kind of would prefer things a certain way, federally versus statewide.
Sure.
And a lot of that, though, is so theoretical that I'd have to turn the clock back to 1920 to start to before 1930. What's the year? The switch in time that saved 9 was that? Was in the 30s.
Was like the 30s. Yes.
Yeah.
But you could talk about Wickard v. Filburn.
Yeah, 1937. Yeah, I could. Yeah, if I could. But guess what? That's not happening.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'm not going to live in some libertarian la la land to pretend that we're going to have a perfect ordering of federalism just the way that the founding fathers wanted it. Thank you very much. No, that's not happening. I want abortion to be illegal. I don't view Roe v. Wade as bad because it was a reading comprehension mistake for how to interpret the Constitution. It was bad because it led to the deaths of tens of millions of children.
Yeah, John, 60 million dead babies is bad, but what really galls me is that constitutional misinterpretation.
If we overturn Roe v. Wade and then all of a sudden every state votes for legal abortion, I am not happier.
Right.
When we return, we'll dig more into this. We're going to talk about this sort of bizarre Pledge of Allegiance towards IVF, as well as getting to some state pro-life issues, particularly with assisted suicide. That is next on Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. We're back with Right to Life Radio. President Trump gave his big statement on the abortion issue earlier this week. Jonathan Keller and I are here to dissect the whole thing. All right, Jonathan, we had a couple of different things still to get to with President Trump's statement. One is the bizarre Pledge of Allegiance to IVF, and the other is the whole we need to win elections to save the culture, which saving the culture does not apparently involve ending abortion. So let's get to both of those things. All right. So first I want to talk about this Pledge of Allegiance that Trump keeps making to IVF. And so many other Republicans keep making to IVF as a result of the more Republicans keep talking about this IVF issue, the more absolutely infuriated it makes me, because I just think it's so unnecessary, this bending over backwards for IVF, all of it prompted by a very reasonable and correct decision by the Alabama State Supreme Court, which okay, let me just lay out what's going on with this IVF thing. Why did all these Republican politicians all of a sudden start saying IVF is critical? We need to have legal IVF. Even Trump, in this whole big statement he has on abortion, he says, well, it's not a federal issue anymore. Abortion's not a federal issue anymore. But I'm going to ensure that there's access to IVF in all 50 states. As if that's a federal issue somehow.
Right.
Like why are we pretending to be these unbelievably strict federalists, 10th Amendment respecting federal government shouldn't interfere in things that the Constitution doesn't explicitly say? The Commerce Clause has been interpreted way too broad.
It's not up to the states.
We're doing that with abortion, but not for IVF. All right, so let me just explain this IVF controversy. One of my former professors at Notre Dame Law School, Carter Snead, had actually a really good piece in The Atlantic, and I wish I had seen it around the time that this was being debated, where he talked about this whole IVF controversy. So the Alabama Supreme Court issued a ruling saying that IVF clinics could be sued for the negligent destruction of IVF embryos. The immediate reaction to that Alabama State Supreme Court decision, and let's also remember, it's the Alabama State Supreme Court, not the U.S. Supreme Court, not a federal appellate court, just Alabama's State Supreme Court, which is charged with interpreting Alabama state law.
Yep.
It doesn't even impact Mississippi's state law. It only impacts Alabama. The Alabama Supreme Court was looking at the question of Alabama, like most states, has a law on the books allowing people to sue someone for wrongful death. All right? If someone, crashes their car into my house and kills my wife, I can sue them for wrongful death.
Right.
Okay. Alabama's state wrongful death statute allowed people to sue for the wrongful death of a child in utero. All right. Someone crashes their car into my house, and if my wife is pregnant and the baby dies as a result of that, I can sue that person for wrongful death in Alabama. The question before the Alabama State Supreme Court was, can you sue for wrongful death if someone negligently destroys an embryo in an IVF clinic where that embryo is not inside somebody's womb, he's in a petri dish or in a test tube or whatever?
Yep.
What had happened in Alabama was there was an IVF clinic. The clinic didn't secure the place properly. Someone wandered into the back of the IVF clinic, grabbed I don't know what it was, a vial or a petri dish or a test tube or something that contained several embryos, dropped it, it broke, and all those embryos were destroyed. The parents of those destroyed embryos, so people who were seeking IVF services, by the way, sued for wrongful death and said, hey, Alabama's state wrongful death statute applies to children in utero. Why would it not apply to children in vitro? Alabama's state Supreme Court said, well, this clearly applies to preborn human beings. Doesn't seem to make any difference whether they're in the womb or out of the womb, so you're allowed to sue. Well, the IVF industry got all bent out of shape about this and said, oh, this is going to limit people's access to IVF if we're ever allowed to be sued.
And to be fair, I kind of think that they should be afraid because, as we've talked about on past shows, the industrial level of waste, as in killing unborn children, that IVF clinics do is
immense. Yeah. They have tons of embryos that they're keeping in frozen storage, which they shouldn't. They create way more embryos than can possibly implant. So they're either destroying embryos or freezing embryos. So the IVF clinic, like any industry, doesn't want to be open to lawsuits. So they panic. But the reporting on that Alabama Supreme Court decision that was just interpreting an Alabama law was like, oh, this is the result of Republicans overturning Roe v. Wade. This is an assault on the right to choose. None of it had anything to do with the Dobbs decision. None of it had anything to do with Roe v. Wade. It was a state-level decision interpreting a state statute that had absolutely nothing to do with abortion, with Roe v. Wade, with Dobbs, whatever. this turned into some Democrats making some attacks, I think very quietly, because I hadn't even heard any of these attacks, saying Republicans oppose IVF. See, this Republican Alabama State Supreme Court says that IVF clinics can be sued. And Republicans, rather than just responding by saying, that's stupid, Republicans aren't trying to ban IVF, Republicans instead focus so much lavish time and attention to say, no, we would never do anything to touch IVF. We'll pass an Alabama state law basically never allowing the IVF industry to ever be sued for negligence ever.
They have a level of immunity to accountability and prosecution now
that they didn't have before.
Well, not only that they didn't have before, but basically from talking to my friend Stephanie Smith, who runs the Alabama Policy Institute out there, essentially the only industries that are, or the only one industry maybe that has a greater level of exemption from prosecution and protection,
or from lawsuits, right?
Yes, is probably like the vaccine industry.
Yeah. The post-COVID, Pfizer's like, hey, no one's allowed to sue us for COVID vaccines.
To put it in perspective for those of you who are like, well, what's the big deal? It's like, no, you're essentially saying there is virtually nothing you can do anymore
in an IVF clinic.
Incur accountability.
Liability.
Either criminal accountability or even
civil liability. Yeah. So, and all these Republicans are just, in spite of the problems that all these allegedly pro-life Republicans who think life is valuable from conception and natural death, all these Republicans are looking at this industry that creates way more embryos than will ever come to term. Tons of embryos, who the only options for these embryos is either indefinitely keep them in permanent storage or destroy them. And that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of embryos destroyed in this industry every single year, maybe into the levels of more than the number of abortions that happen every year. Republicans have instead decided to absolutely pledge allegiance to the flag of IVF as if it is this holy grail, this immaculate industry that can never be, whose practices can never be questioned or challenged. And here's President Trump in this speech going on and on and on about it, to the point of saying, abortion is out of the hands of the federal government. It's just for the states. But I'm going to ensure that there's access to IVF in all 50 states. That was one of the things he said in that statement. Access to IVF in all 50 states. I'm sorry, if we're all of a sudden
federal law, John, you have to have federal law. See, John, here's what you have to understand. Sometimes in some states around the country, some states will not do enough to protect IVF and protect the rights of parents, as he says at the beginning of that statement, to form families. At the very beginning, John, let me read it for those of you again. Yeah. Like the overwhelming majority of Americans, including the vast majority of Republicans, conservatives, Christians, and pro-life Americans, I strongly support the availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious baby. What could be more beautiful or better than that? So, John, look, there are some states that...
a form of creating children that does not involve wastage of, 1 million embryos per year.
Well,
that would be more beautiful.
Look, some states out there, these backwards, regressive states, they don't support the availability of IVF. And as a result, the federal government needs to step in and, impose this more enlightened view.
And that's the thing, is that all of a sudden we are all these 10th Amendment scholars, and we're looking through a microscope at, should the federal government be involved in imposing restrictions on abortion? But meanwhile, have the federal government pay for IVF for everybody.
It'd be one thing if this was like a day apart or like a week apart.
It was in the same video statement. And the IVF thing is bad. The IVF thing is bad. Mm-hmm. Look, I have tried to give President Trump the benefit of the doubt when it comes to this. I don't know why necessarily. We're 501c3. I don't oppose him. We're not endorsing or opposing anyone for office in our 501c3 capacity here.
Correct.
But now, when we return, we're going to talk about the stuff Trump wasn't talking about, which is all the federal policy that only the president can control when it comes to abortion. That is next on Right to Life Radio. We're back with Right to Life Radio. All right, Jonathan, we've been talking about this Trump statement pretty much the whole hour. So our expedited California update, it looks like SB 1196, the really bad euthanasia bill, is possibly dead on arrival. The biggest pro-assisted suicide advocacy group in California actually opposed it. There were some amendments to the bill, but we will see. So we think that bill may be dead. We will let you know if any updates happen. Now, with that being said, I want to go, Jonathan, with regard to President Trump's statement he made this past Monday. Talked all about I'm not supporting, everyone needs to follow their heart in how they vote on statewide abortion referenda.
Yes.
I'm not pursuing any policy when it comes to the federal level when it comes to abortion. It's for the states now. It's out of the federal hands. The problem with that is that there's still a bunch of federal policies that are in the hands of the president.
Correct.
When it comes to abortion, it's in the hands of the executive branch of government, which the president controls. So,
John, just real quick, an example of a few of those policies that the president can, at a whim, theoretically, light switch, flip on or off.
Yes.
Like the Mexico City policy.
Mexico City policy, which determines whether or not the American government will fund foreign non-governmental organizations that provide abortions overseas.
And when I say light switch, I mean, I know that's flippant, but literally that was a policy under President Bush, and then President Clinton overturned it, like his first day in office.
Yes.
And then it was the policy under President George W. Bush, and then Obama overturned it his first day in office. And then President Trump put it back his first day in office, and then Biden overturned his first day in office.
So there's a bunch of policies like that, as Jonathan's saying, that when a new president comes into office, it has to do with abortion, and the president alone controls it.
Right.
The president alone, his administration can control it. So I would ask the president, he has all these things he says he's not going to do, but he's not saying anything that he is going to do with regards to all these really important abortion policies. Like, what are we going to do with Mexico City policy? Trump had the right policy in place in his first term. Will he have it in his second term? Will he ban abortions on military bases? Will he again try to take away Title X funding from entities like Planned Parenthood, like he did in his first term? Will he continue to support embryo-destructive stem cell research? A huge problem in the first Trump administration was that he kept paying for embryo-destructive stem cell research through the National Institutes of Health. Are we going to fund fetal tissue research through the National Institutes of Health? That was another horrible thing that the Trump administration was funding during its administration until people like David Daleiden and Lila Rose sounded the alarm on it, and then Trump belatedly stopped funding it. So it's not just, and I think most importantly, above anything else, will Donald Trump roll back the Biden administration regulatory policies, the Biden FDA policies on the abortion pill? We learned like 2 weeks ago that the number of abortions in America have been skyrocketing, and that the number of pill abortions have been skyrocketing. Over 1 million abortions in America in 2023. Over 60% of abortions are now through the abortion pill. And it's happening after President Biden in 2021 says that the abortion pill can be shipped through the mail and picked up at major pharmacies and prescribed without an in-person visit. Right now, that regulatory change is being debated at the Supreme Court.
Yep.
Supreme Court's going to decide whether that regulatory change was legal or not. President Trump, his administration is going to have to decide, are we going to roll that back? Mm-hmm. Are we going to roll back the approvals for the abortion pill? Maybe we say that the original 2000 approval of the abortion pill was illegitimate. That needs to be decided. And maybe Trump's just not going to say anything, but do the right thing. I hope so.
Yep.
But he's not giving pro-lifers a lot of reasons to vote for him.
That's right.
That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next time on Power Talk.